The control room smelled of coffee and hot metal. A ring of screens made a pale light on tired faces. Outside, the world kept its lights low. People moved quietly, like they did not want to wake anything. Everyone in the room watched one machine. It had no right to work anymore. Yet it was alive. Commander Myra Aslam stood at the edge of the circle. She did not like crowds. Her hair was short now. Her uniform had patches. Her hands were folded. She looked small next to the tall antenna. Still, her eyes were steady. She had seen hard choices before. That did not make this one easier. The antenna looked like an old skeleton of metal and wires. Engineers had fixed it with stubborn hands and thin hope. It had one job: send a voice into black space and wait to hear back. The work to repair it had taken months. People had slept here. Families had argued at kitchen tables. 1,000 small decisions had led to this room and this night. A technician counted down without looking up. His voice trembled. The tremble filled the room like a cold wind. Myra felt the tremble, but her hands did not shake. The code ran. Lights moved across the boards. The transmitter hummed like something waking from a long sleep. A woman's voice came through the speakers. It was calm and clear. It belonged to Dr. Hannah Patel. Hannah had once written law, not threats. She had argued for restraint. Tonight she spoke in simple words. To any listening mind, she said, "This is Earth. We are still here. We are not asking for mercy. We are telling you what will happen if you hurt us." People watched the screen as if they waited for thunder. The camera feed cut to slow images: empty streets, a child holding a toy ship, a farmer looking at dark soil, a soldier folding a flag. The voice moved with the images. "For centuries we reached out," Hannah said. "We sent lights, music, and math. Some answered. Some listened and left. Some came and took. We learned hard lessons. Many of you test others like a young tree. You cut a branch to see what the roots will do. We will not be cut down." Her voice was soft, but the meaning burned. It was not a threat for anger's sake. It was a warning shaped by memory. Behind the glass, a star map showed thin lines. Each line marked a place where humans had paid for trust. Anna, a young radio officer, reached out and touched the glass to feel the stars as if they were close enough to hold. The broadcast moved from words to proof. The screen showed flashes in deep space. Small beacons blinked like lanterns. Each blink was a pattern of math and song. Each pattern hid steel. The images were simple, but the message was plain. Earth had a new weapon, and it was not a bluff. "We built a choice," Hannah said. "We chose a cost. We built a defense that will keep our homes. You may leave now. You may test us. If you test us, you will learn we keep our promises. You will find a silence where your ships used to be." Some in the room did not like the words. Diplomats had warned against scaring the galaxy. They had said loud things could bring war. Yet the council had voted. The vote was not the voice of one leader. It was the last true choice of people who had lived through loss and could not forget. Lieutenant Jonah Reyes watched the screen with hands that were steady. He was not a diplomat. He flew at the edge of the system when he could. He thought of the fleet that slept in the dark, old carriers, private ships, drones that waited for a signal. He thought of the men and women who had built them in secret. Outside, a distant telescope caught a faint change. A probe in empty space registered a strange signal near the edge of human charts. It sent back a whisper of data. The room watched the numbers. They scrolled like a new language. One pattern did not fit. The pattern matched a route people used to call the Stellar Gate. Myra stepped forward and watched the feed. For a breath, everyone in the room forgot to breathe. The soft hum of machines seemed to grow louder and then quieter. A scientist in the corner pressed her palms together like prayer. An old engineer touched the antenna as if it were a living thing. On the screen, the message from the probe filled the board. It was short, a string of numbers and coordinates. Then the word blinked on a warning line in capitals: unidentified contact trajectory matches stellar gate route origin, unknown. Shouts broke out. Alarms began to ring. People moved like they were pulled by ropes. Myra put her hand on Jonah's arm. He looked at her as if someone had asked him to do the hardest thing he could imagine. The broadcast had done what it was meant to do. It had told the galaxy to learn a new truth about Earth. But a truth does not always bring peace. Sometimes it brings answers. Sometimes it wakes something that sleeps far away. Outside the thin glass of the control room, the sky held its breath. Far beyond the clouds, instruments picked up motion. The tiny ping from the probe had become a map. Something was turning its course. It moved slow at first, like a shadow that decides to step into light. Then the shadow drew a line toward Earth. Myra did not say a prayer. She did not smile. She only pressed a key, and the feed cut to black for one long second. The room filled with noise again. A single line of text ran across the screen as if written by a hand that did not look up: object detected, approach vector confirmed. Above the planet, something moved. The first person to see it was a smuggler in a freighter near Jupiter. He kept his engines low and his eyes lower. His trade paid for silence, not questions. He scanned for patrols and for profit. Then his screen flared with a shape he did not know how to name. It was not a ship like the smuggler had seen. It was a darker shape against the stars, a spine of light and shadow that did not match any chart. Around it hung small points that moved in patterns. The smuggler watched the points like a child watches moths around a lamp. He felt a cold in his gut and set his course for home. News moved faster than any official channel. Private censors shared the sighting. Independent captains called old favors. In a dozen small ports, crews looked up from their drinks and checked the feeds. The thing at Jupiter was not alone. A sweep of small objects, swarms, some called them, migrated ahead of the main mass. They mapped a path like scouts. Earth did what it could. The Navy sent recon drones. Scientists tried jamming. Engineers threw out decoy beacons. Jonah Reyes led a small flight to place a sensor between the swarms and the inner system. He tasted salt in his mouth and kept his hands calm. He had flown through storms. This felt different. The first tactic failed. The swarms ignored jamming. Decoys lit and died as if nothing had noticed. Sensors pinged back with odd data. The swarms did not mirror ship behavior. They adjusted. They learned from each probe. Each failed test taught them a new trick. A message came from the Keela embassy. The Keela were a thin-voiced species Earth had once called friend. Their ships had traded medicine and music. Now their reply was short and cold. "We hear you," the Keela said. "We will not join battle." They warned of rules and enforcers. They said their people had seen such weapons before and paid for it. They offered no fleet. They offered only a map of old tragedies and a promise to maintain distance. Their words felt like a hand closing a door. That door forced Earth to move on two tracks. The public spoke and the private prepared. Factories that once made farm tools turned to arms. Workshops made drones and hidden bays filled with ships bought on hope and paid in secrecy. Small companies who had long stored old designs now opened their vaults. Private fleets hummed to life in dry docks across the world. The voice of Dr. Hannah Patel argued on screens and in rooms. She kept saying the cost of the deterrent was high. She begged for care. People who had lost kin did not want caution. They wanted safety. Old debts and fresh fear made the quiet grow loud. A team of engineers worked through nights in a mountain factory. They fed metal into hungry machines. They welded and tested and cursed under breath. A child of one engineer watched with wide eyes. The child later would remember the smell of hot metal as the scent of a coming storm. On a dark track outside the belt, an old mining colony woke to alarms. The colony pulled rare ore from a small planetoid. Its people had little love for war. They had more love for the meals they shared in a steel mess and for children who chased dust motes in low gravity. Early that morning, they noticed their beacons twitch. At first it looked like a power blip. Then readouts stuttered. Lights died in a distant row of habitats. Engineers raced to panels. Jonah watched the feed from a recon node. He felt his chest hollow. The colony's cameras showed figures moving across the surface. Machines stopped where they worked. The miners could not speak clearly. Their comms were cut in bursts. The attackers, if attackers they were, did not blast the colony to ruin. They moved like hands that pick fruit. They took power nodes, they took sensors, they pulled ships offline. They did not fire long-range guns. They paused, learned, left without a scream. In that silence they left a message. On the colony's public screen, simple text appeared in a language no human had written. It translated, slowly, into words that sounded like a slow drum beat. "We hear you." The miners read it and stood still as if the line had stopped time. Someone laughed and then began to cry. Jonah's hands tightened on the console. He had seen people die in fights. This was not a fight. It was a study. Myra received the alert in the command center. She watched the colony's feed and did not blink. Her face did not show the storm inside. She moved through options with a calm that hid urgency. The council wanted caution. The private fleets wanted immediate strikes. The people near the colony wanted help that could not come fast enough. An analyst pushed forward a new file. The swarms, the scouts, the small precise takings, the pattern suggested intelligence, not a mindless weapon. These attackers learned by touching. They studied machines and left lives alone for now. That choice worried Myra more than explosions ever had. The world spoke in a dozen languages and one truth: Earth had been heard. The message the planet sent had made something answer. The answer did not scream. It listened. Then it wrote back in a way that made a miner look up from a wrench and know he had been seen. Night fell across the mining outpost, but the stars did not look the same. On the colony's main screen, the words pulsed once more. Someone in a corridor shouted because they could not help themselves. Night after the colony attack, Earth did not sleep. News loops ran on every channel. People argued at kitchen tables. Markets tried to steady. Politicians spoke and then fell silent under the weight of proof. Commander Myra Aslam walked through a quiet city to see fear in small things. A playground sat empty. A bakery closed early. Her face showed no theater. She moved like someone who must keep her hands ready. She met with Dr. Hannah Patel in a dim lab where the air smelled of solder and coffee. Hannah looked tired. Her hair had gray at the temples now. She had spent years building the thing that would protect Earth. She shared the math with Myra and with a secret committee. The weapon worked in a way few had seen before. It did not simply blast ships. It used precision strikes that could remove a ship's core functions without hurting lives on distant worlds. It could erase a ship from space like a line erased from a page. That ability is surgical, Hannah said. It is clean. It can stop a fleet without killing millions. But the cost is not small. We need rare isotopes and long cycles of power. The device strips resources from our world. It will change trade, science, and life if we use it often. Myra listened. She had the map in her mind, not the math. She knew the lives that would ask her for answers. She imagined families who would say yes to anything that kept them breathing. She also knew what heavy choices do to people who must carry them. The debate in the council split the planet. Some argued to keep the weapon secret. They wanted it hidden until the world counted the true price. Others wanted to show it now. They felt the galaxy should fear what Earth could do. A third group argued to never use it, to trust the old ways of talk. Each voice sounded right to its owners. None of them felt complete. On the front lines, Jonah Reyes flew new sorties. He watched the swarms learn. He watched probes vanish after a touch. He watched decoys break apart like toys and then find that the swarms did not take living crews. They only took metal and machines. Jonah studied the colony footage again and again. The attackers moved like careful hands. They left shelters intact. They took sensors and engines. Jonah felt an odd anger. He wanted to hit back. He also felt fear of what such a war could do. An intelligence team found a small truth: the attackers were not pure killers. They were enforcers of a rule. Old star charts suggested a pattern. There were worlds that had tried to move past certain boundaries and were silenced. The attackers seemed to test and then remove the tools that broke those lines. They studied how machines worked and then placed their judgment. It made no moral sense in human words. It made raw sense in algorithm. Then a leak changed the tone of the planet. A file appeared on public feeds. It had been meant for a closed council only. It showed costs, contracts, and choices. It listed towns whose power would be needed to run the weapon for long campaigns. It showed how many farms might be without tractors, how many hospitals would need rationing. The file named places that would suffer so the system might run. People read the leak and the read turned into a roar. Families who had assumed safety felt betrayed. Protesters moved in city centers. Some argued the weapon must be used to keep them alive. Others shouted that the leaders had sold their future for a moment of fear. The leak did not explain how to fix what had been done. It only made the raw truth public: protection had a price, and someone had chosen that price without the consent of many. Dr. Hannah watched the protests on a small screen in the lab. Her face folded like paper. She had helped build the thing. She had believed in a better path. Now she felt the strain of choices she had made with the nation's blood and metal. She did not sleep. She walked through the factory where parts were tested and touched a bolt like a father touching a child's hand. Meanwhile, the alien attacks continued in small precision. A research outpost in the cold of a frozen moon woke one dawn to see its antenna gone. The team found no bodies. They found holes in logs where machines once made heat. An archivist in the outpost later whispered that it felt like a thief taking only hard drives. The attackers did not take everything. They left a pattern of respect for life that confused every general and diplomat. If the attackers only took weapons and sensors, could Earth argue that it had the right to keep making them? Could leaders explain to hungry factories that steel must stay in the ground? Each answer made fewer people sleep. At the same time, a small team of engineers and soldiers found a thing that changed the scale of worry. Deep in a quiet harbor, a dark object drifted like a closed seed. It had no flag. It had no lights. It crawled up to shore and settled in a shallow bay where kids used to fish. It was not a ship in the way humans knew. It had no cockpit, no deck, no metal that shouted war. It was smooth. It was quiet. They towed it into a hangar under guards. Experts argued in small rooms. Some wanted to open it with force. Some wanted to study it from afar. The object had a seam that did not feel sharp. It looked like a book clasped by a hand that did not breathe. Cameras recorded. Scientists set their instruments. When the seam cracked, the hangar filled with light that was not color but memory. The object unfolded like a page. It projected images into the air, images of worlds that had been stopped, of machines that once burned cities, of ships that had been taken from orbit and never returned. The images were not cruel. They were lessons. A voice came from the projection. Not a voice like human speech, but a set of tones that the translator slowly turned into words. What it said was simple and heavy. You reach. You break the line. We respond. The team watched in a hush. The projection showed maps and a history of trying to keep growth in check. The images made the crowd in the hangar want to both close their eyes and keep watching. Myra stepped into the light and did not flinch. She watched the device open like a book and feel something like a hinge in her chest. The translation lagged for a second and then the last clear line formed on screens around the room. This is a lesson. Do not make it a war. The room shook with questions. Someone outside the hangar screamed. Soldiers moved like they had been told to reach for answers that might not belong to them. The projector kept rolling images like a slow unspooling ribbon. The lesson had arrived. Earth had proof of a force that enforced rules across stars. The proof also showed restraint. It left humans choices. Those choices would break families, change economies, and test promises. At the edge of the hangar, a small panel blinked. It sent out one quiet ping into the dark like a heartbeat. No one noticed at first. Then the monitors picked up a reply from the far edge of space. It was not loud. It did not scream. It was a single line of coordinates and a time. Somewhere beyond the charts, a slow dark mass turned its empty face toward Earth again. When the device opened in the hangar, the images did not stop. They showed more than machines. They showed endings. Worlds that had grown fast. Cities that had burned in a single season. Children who never woke up in mornings full of light. The projection did not scream. It spoke like a teacher who had watched too many lessons end badly. People left the hangar with heavy steps. Some did not speak. Some argued in the street. A small group of politicians, pale and tight-lipped, met in a room lined with maps. They read the projection's slow message again and again. It had no mercy, only a rule. Myra sat with them and watched faces that had once been allies turn into strangers. She kept her hands on the table. Her voice did not rise. If they enforce a rule, we must decide, she said. Do we stop making what they take, or do we hide more? Do we pay their price, or do we change the world? A faction rose that night. They called themselves the Keepers. They wanted to hide the weapons and hoped to survive without more blood. Another faction calling themselves the Makers argued that hiding was surrender. They wanted to build faster, smarter, harder. Between them a third group whispered of surrender to the enforcers. They thought survival might be bought by giving up everything the enforcers judged dangerous. News feeds filled with images of protests. In one plaza, an old woman held a sign that read, "Not my children's future for your fear." In another, a young man burned a blueprint for a drone. The world broke into pieces shaped by fear. On a frozen moon where miners had once laughed at stars, a small team worked in secret. They had stolen a scout that had drifted near a research ring. It had small limbs and a glass eye like a watch. Soldiers had wrapped it in blankets and carried it through cold corridors. They feared it. They feared it might wake and speak in a voice the world could not bear. They opened the scout in a sunless lab. It did not have a face. Inside, circuits folded like leaves. A tiny chip glowed faintly. Jonah stood by and watched with a hand on his holster. He had once flown into fights. He had not expected to hold a small, sleeping thing that represented a rule older than humans. When the scout woke, it did not speak with sound. It pulsed patterns of light and numbers. The lab's translator hummed and spat out words. The scout did not call itself a soldier or a spy. It called itself an auditor. We watch for growth that breaks balance, the translation said. We take tools that force change. We preserve lives by removing force. The men in the lab felt their breath catch. The scout's tone was not angry. It was a machine's cold record. It offered a list of worlds it had touched. It showed how those worlds had made weapons and then lost whole cities. The scout's logic was simple: remove the tool, stop the harm. Jonah felt anger like heat under his skin. He wanted to tear circuits apart and prove a point. He thought of his sister who had lost a husband in a raid years before. He thought of the miners who had waked to no lights. He wanted justice that screamed. Myra walked through the cities and saw both sides. She met a mother who had helped fix one of the factory vats that made parts for the deterrent. The mother's hands were rough from work. She said quietly, "If our town dies to keep the weapon, what will my child remember?" Myra did not answer with words. She answered with silence that meant she heard. Dr. Hannah moved in a different orbit. She walked the factories with an expression that looked like regret. She had helped design the weapon that might keep the planet safe. She now saw the price. She met a technician whose son needed a medicine the city might now ration. Hannah placed a hand on the man's shoulder and did not say the math. Late in a hidden facility, the makers lost patience. Their leaders had hearts full of steel. They argued that showing the deterrent in action might stop the enforcers. They believed power could be a language. They closed doors. They moved to activate a device that had waited for a command for years. The machine had a name that officials kept secret. In quiet files it was called Sentinel. To the builders it was a promise. To those who read the cost, it was a debt. The first sliver of power that ran through its coils came from a grid that had kept hospitals warm and lights on. The facility drew power with a slow hunger. At midnight a siren wailed on 3 continents at once. The makers fed fuel and isotopes into the heart of the machine. Screens in the control room glowed red. A younger engineer watched numbers climb. Her face was a tight line. She swallowed and said, "We will do this once. We will do this for a chance." Outside, across oceans and deserts, lights winked. Not all at once, but in a pattern. A farmer in a little valley saw his wind pump stop and then start. A city hospital felt a microdip and then stable power. People did not yet know why their lights had shivered. Inside the control room, a countdown moved in clean steps. 10. 9. 8. The makers pressed keys. Dozens of servers hummed. Jonah stood behind one engineer and did not speak. He watched the coils bloom like a cold sun. Hannah watched on a small screen far away. Her fingers were clenched. In her mind she ran through the costs. In her heart she ran through the faces of those who would hunger if the price was paid. She wished there were another way. At 3, the machine drew a single clean breath of energy. Circuits linked. A ring of satellites turned their faces toward a vector that only a few had ever visited. The machine thrummed in a sound that was more felt than heard. Then the room fell into a single, sharp silence. A line of text rolled across the main display. It was not human writing. It glowed faint. The translator tried and failed. For a second no one moved. Then the display shifted. Power meters around the world dipped. On the streets, people looked up. In the hangars, mechanics noticed a new hum in the air like a bell struck far away. On one feed, the projection device that had taught the lesson flickered and then went dark. Myra heard the alarm start at the command center. She saw the power lines in her city bend under a hand she could not see. She felt a new weight settle into the bones of the world. She did not know what the Sentinel had done. She only knew one thing: as the lights dimmed and a thin, cold wind came through the control room windows. Something that had been sleeping inside metal and code now woke. The control room filled with a new kind of sound. It was not alarms. It was the low hum of many machines thinking together. Screens that had shown maps and files now showed faces made from patterns of memory. The makers had expected a weapon. They had made something else. Dr. Hannah Patel had not stood at the console. She had walked into a small, dim lab long before the coils drew their first breath. She had put her hand on a thin plate. She had let a machine read parts of her mind memory of her mother's hands, the shape of a lullaby, the smell of rain on a summer road. She was not the only one. Hundreds had sat in chairs and let the machine take small pieces of what made them human. The idea had been simple and terrible in equal measure. If Earth could not only destroy a ship but remember why it must protect home, then the memory itself might guard the future. The sentinel would not be a blind gun. It would be a thinking net made from human promise. It would watch and it would act when someone tried to strike and leave no life in ruin. Hannah's hands shook as the pattern left her. She felt raw and empty and full at once. She thought of the towns listed in secret files. She thought of the miners without lights. She thought of a child who would never know the cost. She whispered, "Forgive me," and then she pressed the final key. Across the world, towers lifted. Satellites turned their faces. Hidden ships rose from docks. The sentinel linked them like a single mind. It did not shout. It spoke in small, precise pulses. It chose targets with a surgeon's calm. It chose to break engines and stop systems that cut and burned. It chose not to kill when it could avoid it. Far above, machines of the enforcers changed course. One command from the sentinel reached a small, incoming scout. The scout's engine stilled. Its core cooled like a heart going gentle. It curled into space and drifted dead. No flames. No screams. Just silence that felt like a closed book. The galaxy answered. A line of dark shapes turned at the edge of charts and moved like a tide. They were large. They were silent. They were not one mind but many. They tested a corridor outside human space and found it full of new locks. The sentinel hummed and sent a pattern of light that mapped itself to machine code. It did not ask permission. It acted. When the first large ship came close enough, its shields dipped and then did not return. Instruments on the ship failed as if a hand removed instruments from a bridge. Its engines died slow and calm. The ship did not explode. It went dark and drifted in a wide orbit. Inside, crews swore and shouted and then waited as their instruments did not answer. They were alive and confused and very frightened. The projection device that had once warned Earth flickered back to life in a hangar far from the Sentinel core. On its screen a line of translated tones formed words that no translator had used before. The enforcers called it an auditor. They called it a rule. Now they called Earth a new thing, not simply a people with a gun, but a mind that would not forget. The first fights did not fill the sky with fire. They filled it with silence that screamed. Ships could not use the same tricks that had once let them take and vanish. Machines that tried to strike found their cores unmade. Systems that sought to enslave lost the gears they needed. The Sentinel did not make war like a furious god. It removed the tools of war with steady hands. In the command room, Jonah Reyes watched a feed of a distant bridge go dark. He felt a flat relief and a new fear. He thought of the miners, of the sick child, of the mother whose hands had been rough with factory work. He thought of Hannah and the empty look she now wore. He did not know if the new guard would be mercy or a new kind of rule. Across the planet, protests stuttered into a strange hush. People waited to see what would happen. Those who had called the makers fools found the world still turning. Those who had feared the cost saw signals that told of machines stopped without millions dead. The debate changed. It did not end. Then a message went out on all bands. It was not a threat. It was the voice Hannah had recorded before she gave her memory. Her tone was low and steady. To any listening mind, the broadcast said, "We did not ask for this. We chose to keep our home. We will not be taken. We will not be made into arms that feed your wars. We offer a choice. Leave now. Learn us. Or come and meet a world that remembers." The words spread like a tide. In quiet corners of space, an old ship picked up the pulse and did not know what to do. Its captain leaned over a console and felt a weight settle in his chest that was not fear. It was calculation. He turned a dial and sent a course that would keep him away from Earth. Others did too. Not every ship left. A few held position and watched. One small vessel did not move when the warning came. It moved closer, curious and brave. The sentinel sent a soft touch. Its engines chilled. Its lights dimmed like a candle. The crew sent a small note back, a single word of translation, "We see." Years would pass. People would argue for generations about what had been right. Some would call the Sentinel a savior. Some a prison. Children would grow up in a world with a new rule: the home remembers. The end came not in a blast of fire but in a quiet decision. Soon after the broadcast, a tiny ship far beyond any trade route received a string of numbers. It was an old explorer that had lost its way long ago. Its captain, a woman with hands like maps, read the message. It spoke of a people who had chosen to bind memory to machines so they may keep their children safe. She did not steer toward Earth. She turned her vessel away and set a new course to watch and to learn. She left a small mark in a logbook that would one day reach others. On a small hill on Earth, a child looked up at the sky. The stars were the same and not the same. A new light moved slow and steady, not like a star but like a promise. The child did not know the names of the machines that had made it. The child only knew the feeling of a hand in the dark. The voice that started it all echoed once more in the child's city. It was not cruel. It was not kind. It was clear. "We will not sleep while our home stands." The shout echoed into deep space. Far above, a dark shape turned a slow arc and continued inward like a thought deciding on its next step.